We're beginning a new series on the Psalms, and I'm pretty excited about the content that we're going to be working through. But before we get to that, just want to lay some foundation for all of these things. I've mentioned before, I really do love music, and I love all types of music. Jennifer and I, in fact, we love experiencing live music together. And I don't know about you, but that literally means that we can go to some little out of the place, podunk, I don't know what you want to call it, where some person is sitting there with an acoustic guitar playing covers all night, and we can sit and enjoy it. Other times, we do enjoy a rather large venue. So I'm telling you right now that Geodis Field is a great place to go listen to Green Day and Smashing Pumpkins. That's where we were Friday night. Now, something happened Friday night that I'm still not super comfortable with, and Jennifer and I have talked about it and giggled about it a little bit. We got there at 4. Got there early so we could eat dinner and hang out a little bit. And mind you, I realized that I'm rocking my 1994 Toad the Wet Sprocket band shirt and my Vans. I'm screaming Gen Xer, right? Salt and pepper hair, probably too old to be at a Green Day concert. I didn't think so. And we're coming down the stairs with our Daddy's Dog hot dog. Sorry, babe, had to mention it. Sauerkraut, spicy mustard, delicious. Yeah, we're sitting there and we're about to turn to our seat, and this dude just looks at us grinning, and he goes like this. He goes, "Man, it's great to see people like you here." And usually I'm a little bit more tempered, but I turned back around to him. I was like, "Dude, what is that even supposed to mean?" And then he began to kind of stutter through it and talk about it. And obviously what he meant was, it's good to see people like you who grew up in the 90s who are still listening to these bands. Like, we're old. That's what he was saying, right? That's what he was saying. Even though we're not old, he said, you're old. Anyways, we love live music. And we'll get that off the screen there. It's good stuff. I love live music. And I have pretty eccentric taste buds when it comes to music. I enjoy new musicians. I enjoy musicians that I don't know well. I enjoy musicians that do not consider themselves contemporary Christian artists. Doesn't mean that they're not producing Christian music. They might have faith, they may not have faith, but I can tell you this. They are human beings created in the image of God, and they are walking through the same life you and I are, and they're trying to figure it out. And I've been listening to a lot of different music the past few months. I've been listening a lot to Noah Kahan. And goodness gracious, Jamie Abrams, holy cow, Gracie Abrams, Teddy Swims. And they all are doing the same thing we're doing, and they're wrestling with life. And they're writing and singing songs about the ebb and flow of their world. And they pour their hearts into their music. Right? And then sometimes they'll have a whole album that's just created of a bunch of different music, maybe under a certain title. But then other artists at times will create an entire album where the entire album tells a story from the beginning to the end. Thomas Rhett's new album, by the way, just came out. The entire album is about his adoration and commitment to his wife, Lauren. The whole album. Right? So sometimes albums tell an entire story. But even with that, right, most albums, unless they're self-titled by the band, they have a name. They have a title that kind of captures maybe even what the content of the album is going to be about. But then you get to the songs, and every song has a title, providing some kind of hint maybe as to what the song is going to be about. The title communicates something to what you and I are about to hear and experience. And if you're careful, if you're listening to the genre and type and the actual rhythm and the setting of life that this person's writing that song in, it gives us a listening strategy. So at least you and I know what we're about to get into, right? So one of my favorite songs from Teddy Swims right now is called You Still Get to Me. Now, right off the bat, you may not 100% know what that means, but you can guess, right? He's writing about a relationship, a former girlfriend, that he's not in a relationship with anymore, but they had a lot of memories together. And so sometimes a song will play, or sometimes he'll see something, and he goes, she still gets to me. He's with somebody else, she's with somebody else, but she still gets to me. So songs have titles that mean a lot. So here's what I want to say. The Psalms are no different. And that's what we're getting to. You may feel like I've turned a water hose or a fire hydrant on here in just a few minutes, but Psalms are filled with passion and power and misery and celebration and sensitivity and hope, and they're meant to be read and prayed and lived and absorbed and memorized. And so I hope that we begin to make them more a part of who we are based off this series. The human experience. This is what Eugene Peterson says about the Psalms. I love this. Everything that a person can possibly feel, experience, and say is brought into expression before God in the Psalms. Everything. Everything that you and I can possibly feel, experience, or say is found in the Psalms. They're shaped by the people of God. And if you think about it, they're kind of like glasses. You can put them on and they're a lens that you see the world through, and they help you begin to at least ask and maybe answer some of the bigger questions in life. The Psalms literally shaped the prayer life of Jesus. He would have known them inside and out. He knew Psalm 8. We'll mention that here in a few minutes. But they're complex and they're rich and they're filled with symbols and metaphors. And they help us mold character. And they help us articulate our hearts. I don't know about you, but have there ever been times, or let me ask it this way, do you remember, think back to the last time that you felt so deeply about something, but you just couldn't speak it. You didn't have words for it. I think about Mike, and I think about Tori, and I think about Becky yesterday, as well as grandparents and friends who are in such grief and mourning, and all they can do is suck wind. They don't have words for what they're feeling because the pain is so intense. But the Psalms, as we navigate them, even give us words for those moments. And one of my favorite things about the Psalms is they keep us close to the Creator. Right? They keep us close to the one who has created us. And they help us look to God maybe when things do seem hopeless. And when they do their work in us, they can equip us to live by and promote the kingdom that you and I are a part of us. So I just had this wild question, like, what's it look like then for you and I to spend more time in the Psalms? Now, I know a lot of you in this room, we've had a lot of conversations, so I know a lot of you in here have a daily habit and have had a daily habit for a long time of being in the Psalms and praying the Psalms. And if you don't, I want to encourage you to think about what it looks like as an individual to do so, but what's it look like for us as a community to do the same thing. So, through the centuries, the Psalms have been called a lot of different things. They've been called the hymn book at the center of the Bible, the prayer book of Israel and Jesus, the lifeblood of Christians and the Jewish people from the earliest of times. I love this one, a sort of gymnasium. Can you imagine? Just think about that for a second. It's like a prayer gym or a training facility for your heart and for your mind and for your feelings, right? It's this gymnasium, a sort of gymnasium where you can work through things. And then the anatomy of all parts of the soul. These are all things that they have been labeled. And so the Psalms, you might even have your own word for the Psalms. You might relate to one of those. Here's one of my favorite quotes about the Psalms. Anyone at all whose heart is open to new dimensions of the human experience, anyone who loves good writing, anyone who wants a window into the bright lights and the dark corners of the human soul, anyone open to the beautiful expression of the larger vision of reality should react to these poems like someone who hasn't had a good meal for a week. It's all here. It's all here. So what do Psalms look like? We're going to look at the anatomy of a Psalm. Just going to give you some general things. If you're a note taker, these will be things that you can keep with you as you read the Psalms and as you pray the Psalms, but also as we navigate our series together. Here's some things to think about. All the Psalms have kind of their own background, right? They arise from a variety of diverse times, places, circumstances, and voices. So not everybody was going through the same thing when they wrote the particular Psalms that they wrote. So there's a lot of different experience when it comes to a psalm, right? They are prayers. Yes, they are prayers and petitions, but they also instruct us on how to live. They direct us in right paths. They help us function in adversity and opposition, and they give us words for how to ask God for help. depending on the situation that the psalmist is writing about. The title Psalm simply comes from the Septuagint, psalmos, which means to praise. So if you're wondering about where the word even came from, it's that simple. Sometimes there's an indication of authorship, like David. But I want you to hear this as we move forward. That can mean several things. First of all, it might literally mean that David wrote the psalm. It's entirely possible. It may mean that it's dedicated to David. It may mean that the psalm is on behalf of David. It may mean that it belongs to David. Or it's written in the tradition of David. So it can mean any number of those things. And sometimes we know, and sometimes we don't. I am literally telling you that I'm okay. We think David wrote Psalm 8. But if he didn't, I'm okay with that too. Somebody was thinking about David when they wrote it. All right? But you can picture David writing this, and I'll see that here in just a second. By the way, Moses and Solomon are attributed with at least 3 of the Psalms. We think. Right? But they're attributed as well. 116 of the 150 Psalms in Hebrew have headings, titles, or superscriptions. So when you're looking at your Bible, it may say Psalm 8, and it may have some things underneath it, or whatever the rest of the psalm is. Sometimes they have historical notes. We might have an indication about what was happening. We might not. Here's what I will say. Psalms are not history, okay? They're typically not written about history, but every psalm has a history. Does that make sense? They have a history. Sometimes they include really obscure worship terms that we just don't use anymore, but most of them are addressed to God. There's some pretty neat things. So here's kind of a couple more things as we get into this. We've got to consider the genre. And so every psalm has a style or a type or a genre, just like other music and just like other writings. And so it's essential for us to at least know what kind of genre the psalm falls in, because it triggers for us a reading style and a listening style for how to interact with the psalm. Okay? So you're going to have things like hymns. Basic hymns, like William did a great job picking out songs for this entire service. They were all thinking about how awesome God is. And so that's what hymns are. They're songs of joy, right? But they're sometimes about specific experiences of deliverance. Sometimes you have laments. In fact, the majority of the psalms that you and I experience in the text are all laments. They're heavy, heavy prayers of help. Thanksgiving songs, prayers of individuals. I specify that because sometimes there are communal hymns and psalms. Psalms of confidence that rely and repeat and talk about the trust that we have in God. Sometimes the psalms are prophetic, which means it's kind of interesting because there's a voice of God actually in the psalm speaking. Wisdom psalms that instruct us. Remembrance psalms are some of my favorite, because they retell stories about what God has done in the past, how God has rescued or delivered in the past, and they are retelling those stories and those prayers to their children to tell them how God delivered them in the past. And then there's royal psalms. Sometimes they are about the king of God, God the king, and sometimes they are about the earthly king in general. So all big things to consider, including the setting, because every psalm has a setting, right? Whether it was written for a festival or for a celebration, maybe it was written for a procession. I may have already said that. A prophetic psalm, it just depends. And so there's all kind of different ways to consider what this looks like as far as psalms go. So there's societal things happening, right? There's things happening within the person. There's turmoil sometimes that prompts someone to write a psalm. And there's predictable speech patterns. And so here's one of the most important things for you now to remember when it comes to psalms, is for you and I to truly believe that there is a God on the other end of this interaction. Right? Is that you, Miss Irma? I heard you. We need more of this. You won't get me started. They get me wound up real quick, and I appreciate that. There is a God on the other end of your prayers that you are praying to. You're not just praying into the air, right? You are interacting with the creator of the universe. And so there is something happening here. There's two partners. In the Psalms, there's Israel and there's Yahweh or the psalmist. They're bound together in mutual relationship, and that is no different for you and I. When we engage in prayer, when we scream out and cry out to God, we are knowing that there is a God on the other end who hears us. And there's interaction. Whew. So as you and I engage in the Psalms, there's some big questions to ask. What's this psalm doing to me? What is this psalm doing within me? What are the psalms helping me to do or to become? And for you to really consider those questions, it really means that you and I really have to absorb these psalms, and they have to become part of who we are, not just something that we fill into a worship service every now and then. They mean something. And then remember this is from last week. They have three basic categories that represent the flow of human life. There's psalms of orientation, there's psalms of disorientation, and there's psalms of new orientation. Sometimes life is really good, and we're thankful for it. Sometimes life is disrupted. It's not that we're not thankful for it, but there's a lot more going on, and we need a lot of help. And then sometimes God surprises us with that help, and we are newly oriented in these places. So let's look at Psalm 8. I didn't put the superscription up there for Stan earlier. I'm going to be reading out of the NET. Psalm 8. So consider what you've just heard. Psalm 8 for the director of music. This psalm is meant to be used in a worship setting. They're going to be singing it, performing it somehow, according to the Gittith. Stan, I was waiting for you to do your doctorate work on the Gittith, because I still don't know what a Gittith is. I don't know if any of y'all know what a Gittith is. I'm not sure a scholar knows what a Gittith is. We know that it might be some kind of instrument. It might be a banjo. I have no idea, right? Or a horn. We just don't know. A lot of them are stringed instruments, though. And this one does happen to say it's a psalm of David. So here's what I want you to do. We're going to read it one more time. This time, I want you to picture David. I want you to picture somebody like David. I want you to picture yourself gazing into the nighttime sky with very little light pollution, which we have a lot of around here. You got to go to Whispering Pines to get a good shot of the stars sometimes. Picture yourself looking up into the nighttime sky as we get into this. O Lord, our Lord, how magnificent is your reputation throughout all the earth. You reveal your majesty in the heavens above. From the mouths of children and nursing babies, you've ordained praise on account of your adversaries, so that you might put an end to the vindictive enemy. When I look up at the heavens, which your fingers made, and see the moon and the stars which you set in place, of what importance is the human race that you should notice them? Of what importance is mankind that you should pay attention to them? You've made them a little less than the heavenly beings. You crowned mankind with honor and majesty. You appoint them to rule over creation. You have placed everything under their authority, including all the sheep and cattle, as well as all the wild animals, the birds in the sky, the fish in the seas, and everything that moves through the currents of the seas. O Lord, Yahweh, right? The name of God, Yahweh. O Lord, our Lord, how magnificent is your reputation or name throughout all the earth. This is a really big psalm. And it's one of a kind. There are not a lot of psalms like this, but it's literally the first psalm that you and I encounter as a praise hymn in the book of Psalms, especially as you first start this thing out. It begins, first thing I want you to know, the last verse 9 and verse 1 are the exact same thing. O Lord, our Lord, how magnificent is your reputation throughout all the earth. They're bookends. It begins that way and it ends that way. But here's the main purpose of this psalm: to draw attention to the majesty of God. Can you imagine if you and I simply woke up every day with this as our intention? to draw our attention to the majesty of God and let that be the lens that we see all life through. And so Yahweh's name is a big deal in this text, right? It's excellent and splendid is what the author is saying, but it's not just a label. Like, typically, if you say John Micah or just John, there might be some meaning behind it. My dad obviously named me that for a purpose, but it's not a label. Well, it's more of a label, right? That's John. More specifically, that's John Micah, right, Tom? Or that's Tom, okay? But for God, it's bigger than that. It speaks of his character. It speaks of who he is. So when you say Yahweh, it is more. It means more. Here's what it means. God is more than just a manufactured local deity that somebody constructed out of bronze or wood that's being sold in the market. He is bigger than that. It's more than a label. And so this psalmist is just staring into the heavens. And he's asking big questions. We're not looking at history here, but we're looking at the psalm and how it's focused on creation, and it cites God's work in creating the cosmos and humanity. And there's an argument in this text, right? He says that everybody who looks into the sky should be able to pause and go, this can only be the result of the hand of God. It couldn't be anything less. But it also should remind you of the Genesis account. You hear the language, right? But what does the psalmist recognize? The psalmist recognizes that you and I and creation reflect his glory. There's something about it. So you and I are oriented in God's magnificence. But Tom, there's more. Are you ready? The psalmist makes note of the praise of children. I want you to hear all this. This is pretty big, especially if you're a kid in here, raise your hand. Got some kids in here. Yeah, we can call y'all kids. It's okay. It's okay. I'm still a kid to somebody too, right? You're a kid. There's kids in here. Kids, I want you to hear this. What the psalmist is saying, Emmy, can you hear me okay over there? You freaked out because I'm looking right at you, aren't you? Just a little bit. Here you go, Emmy. What the psalmist is saying to you and all the other kids in this room is that your voice is bigger and stronger and louder than the enemy of this world. How does that make you feel? Every child's voice in this room, when they praise, is more powerful than the adversary of this world. And so the psalmist says the enemy will not get the last word. However, the enemy's voice is defeated by the voices of praise of children. How about that? How about that? Maybe the next time we tell a kid to be a little more quiet and worship, maybe we go, stop, don't do that. Like, let them raise their voice. Let them be a part of this. Teach them to praise because their voices are more powerful than anything that Satan can throw at us. And they drown out the ugly voices that speak against God. I mean, Jesus even quotes this in Matthew 21, by the way, as they're telling him to get the children away. He's like, no. It's from the mouths of babes, right? But the psalmist returns to creation. He says, when I look up at the heavens, which your fingers have made, and see the moon and the stars which you set in place, he highlights the intimacy, if you will, that God is personally and intimately involved and invested in creation, right? He imagines God's hands placing the stars and the moon, right? All the planets, if you will. I don't know how you think about creation, but he's literally picturing this artist who's putting things intentionally in space and in the sky. And he highlights the moon and the stars. And he just can't imagine that anybody would look up at that and not see the work of God. So he's just gazing at the splendor. Right? Verse 4 comes the big question. So in light of all this, he's looking up at the sky. He's looking up the grandeur of the heavens, and he says, seriously, like in response to all of this, of what importance is mankind that you would notice or even pay attention to us? That's a pretty big question. He didn't ask what is man. He says, what's the relationship between man and God? And he marvels at the fact that not only does he pay attention to humans, but he cares for humans. So in other words, if you can picture God with his hands, putting the moon and the stars and the planets in place, you were created and I am created in bigger ways than that. And so you too, even as Ephesians 2, David and I have talked about this a lot lately. You and I were created. We are God's poem. His fingers have been intimately involved in shaping who you and I are. But there's an answer to this question. Here's 5 through 8. Well, here's the answer. You made them a little less than the heavenly beings. You crown mankind with honor and majesty. You appoint them to rule over creation. You've placed everything under their authority. So guess what? You and me, we are not accidents. We're not accidents. It's all intentional. In fact, humans are created less than God, but closer to God than anything else in the creative order, because you and I are created in His image. Nothing else is created in His image. So you and I, as Stan mentioned in his reflections, we represent God more than any other creature on earth. We are designed to be image bearers. We're designed to reflect and reveal His glory. But not only that, check this out. You and I have a function. We are participants in creation, in that you and I were given the responsibility and the charge to care for and steward creation and not exploit it. And guess what that means? That means human beings included. It means we don't take advantage of or exploit humans. It means we don't take advantage of or exploit creation at large, because we are caretakers and we are stewards that God has given us the responsibility to care for. Whew. So we have this gift. It's a gift. Like, we are created in His image, and we've been given the gift and responsibility to care for creation. So why explore the Psalms? Right? Kind of makes me, I kind of crack up myself, sorry. It's kind of a redundant, like, it's a silly question, right? Like, why would we not? There's more theology in these 9 verses sometimes than you can read in an entire book. It's rich and it's vast, so why should we explore the Psalms? I don't know why that's so funny to me. So sorry. Why is Psalms 8 still relevant, and in what ways can we live into it and experience? These are my last 2 questions, and then we'll move on from here. Yeah, thanks, Pete. You might be the only one that's feeling that way. We hope that this series on the Psalms provides encouragement for you and I to weave the Psalms into every fabric of your life. Don't let them just be a fraction of your life. Let them weave into the very fabric of your life. When you pray the Psalms, remember, you're not just reading words. You're worshiping the Creator of the universe who created you. And as you pray and interact with the Psalms, we can learn to live in God's time. It's really difficult, right? As well as living in our current space and time and our circumstances, because He shows us how to do that even with these words. Why is Psalm 8 still relevant, and in what ways can we live into it and experience it? This is for everybody in here, but I want those of you who have children in your home to really consider these last few statements. I do believe that the psalmist is staring into the night sky, or at least is reflecting on that. But I want to invite you and encourage you to use this psalm as a morning psalm when you wake up every day. Tape it somewhere on a wall, put it in your car, put it on your table, put it anywhere you can, and use it as a way to frame your day as you begin, especially with your children. And see it as an invitation to simply slow down and orient your day around the magnificence of God, confidently knowing this, that Jesus Christ knew this psalm inside and out. And so what I want to encourage you to do is slow down throughout your day and notice creation. But do that in 2 ways. Allow this psalm to frame your day, but allow yourself to look into creation, humans and creation, and develop this practice of paying attention. And then ask your kids in the morning, what will you look for today? How will you see the goodness of God in creation and other people? Let that be your lens as your children start their day off, as you start your day off. Even if you're not a child, if you're an adult and you're in a difficult work circumstance, or you're dealing with people in general, how might you see the goodness even in people that are annoying to you or frustrate the daylights out of you? Or as you're frustrating the daylights out of somebody else, that they might see the goodness in you, right? But where are you going to look? So ask your kids to look. And how will you notice the goodness of God in creation? So where are you today? Are you in a season of orientation? Things are good? You're filled with joy? You've made really good decisions? You're not frustrated at yourself? You're on cloud nine because you see God's activity and it's clear and you're thankful. Maybe you're in a season of disorientation and your world's been turned upside down like Mike and Becky and Tori's were this past week losing their son. Maybe it's not something that big. Maybe it's just a frustration. Maybe it's inner turmoil, but you are disoriented. But maybe God has surprised you and stepped in and given you something new, so you're in a season of new orientation. Wherever you are, we want to walk with you. We want to pray over you and be with you. And so this is a time where you can come and ask for those kind of prayers. Or you may be here for the first time wanting to enter this whole conversation in baptism with Jesus. You can do any of those things this morning as we stand and sing.